Guys, it's Mr. J with Fanboy JunKtion. We got another episode, and unlike some other shows, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to start out with questions that have been mailed in, commented in, emailed, added, whatever you want to call it. And we're just going to call that messages from the JunkBox, okay? Fanboy JunKtion, JunkBox, whatever. So, first question from the JunkBox today is again from Sergio C. And he says, why do so many of the 80s cartoons that are revived now fail? Well, I think, and quite honestly, he's also a big fan of Masters of the Universe, so I think he's mainly asking about that because he really wants a Masters of the Universe film. So we're going to start with the whole 80s cartoon thing. And, some of you guys may be old enough to remember this, may not. I am, so that's where we're going to go. In the early 80s, 81, 82, laws changed when it came to cartoons and toys, where you could actually make toys based on cartoons. Before that, here in America, they couldn't do that. So, with that, Masters of the Universe was one of the first cartoons that was made based on toys. And you could link them together and kind of have that whole thing going. And the funny thing is that if you like me, I first collected the He-Man figures before the cartoon, and it came with these little comic books, little mini comic books. And in those mini comics, He-Man was a barbarian. The sorceress gave him the weapons to make him stronger, and his whole plot was to try and get the power sword from Skeletor. And when they made the cartoon, it, of course, is nothing like that. You have the whole Prince Adam thing. He pulls up the sword by the power of Grayskull. And bam, he's He-Man. So, for that reason, and I'm sorry, Sergio, to say this, but for that reason, I didn't like the Masters of the Universe cartoon. So I'm going to go ahead and preface this whole thing with that. Is that when it comes to Masters of the Universe, unfortunately, I don't care. But, as far as 80s cartoons, there's a lot of those cartoons from the 80s. When that law was changed, it was just a floodgate. Or a floodgate was open, and it was just everything. Transformers, G.I. Joe, Silverhawks, GoBots. I mean, they were just any cartoon, and then they would just throw a toy line together. You had Thundercats, and then you had Silverhawks, and you had Tiger Sharks, and then you had, Visionaries, and, of course, G.I. Joe and Transformers. And what kind of, for me, it's kind of that whole thing of like a heyday of here's all these cartoons, and some of them were better than others, but it was all essentially huge commercials to sell toys. Bionic 6, Mask. I love the Mask. That's never coming back. And I think what happens is because at that time, you were in that heyday of cartoons based on toys, or toys and cartoons going hand in hand. The story didn't really matter. The plot or how good these shows were, it wasn't about a good intense story or a good well-written story. It was just, hey, how do we get as many of these characters cranked in as fast as possible so we can sell more toys? And even with some of the movies, like with Transformers Season 2 and 3, like they just fast forward it, killed all the old characters so they can have new characters to be stars so they could sell new toys. All that to say is that because of that very basic basis for so many of these cartoons and just trying to sell, I mean, they had a pole position cartoon. I loved the pole position cartoon. But it was based on a video game. They were just trying to get people to go play that video game. You go back, if you watch that cartoon and then play that video game, whatcha? Nothing. I mean, nothing alike at all. Pole Position was just a race car game. And kind of at that one. The Pole Position cartoon was about kids that were secret agents and had cars that were hovercrafts and bulletproof and could fly and went underwater, and they had robots in each one. Completely different. So, all that to say that all of the 80s cartoons were just commercials for toys. Given that, the storylines were very weak. So, as we get older and these cartoons start coming back, they're not as good because it's all about nostalgia. we look back. It's like the Thundercats analogy I made the other day. We remember Thundercats as kids, and we loved that cartoon and thought it was great and so epic. And then as an adult, you go back and watch it, and you go, "Wow, this is kind of bleh." It's for kids. It's a little kid's story. So the only thing for me that you can do is just share those cartoons if you have children with your children. That's what I do. Is I share those cartoons, and some of the joy I get out of those older shows is just watching them with them. And then I'm like, oh, cool, they enjoyed it. It's kind of fun for me to see, and some of them are really bad, and some of them are okay. But what happens is something like Masters of the Universe or Thundercats is now something like Cartoon Network, or they re-release this cartoon 20 years later, 25 years later, and they're not going to just redo the old cartoon. They want to kind of make it for a more adult audience because they know, like me and Sergio and parents around, or just guys who are, remembered as kids and they have money they want to buy them, they pretty much know that that's what they're writing it for. And for me, honestly, what happens is once you, I don't want to say adultize, but maybe try and make those stories more than they are. I mean, like the new Thundercats cartoon. What made that Thundercats cartoon interesting was that they were just these 5 or 6 Thundercats that were by themselves. And no more Thundercats showed up until they needed more Thundercats toys. I mean, that's kind of a very basic version of what happened, but that's kind of the whole thing. Is all you had to do was make a cartoon based on the 5 toys they created, and then somebody in their mind said, "Well, why don't we just make them, refugees?" Cool, it works. Well, with the new cartoon, they tried to make all the different races and the animals and add the whole dog and cat animosity and different races and the mutants. And for you and I, for people, 20s, 30s, whatever, watch that and go, okay, that's kind of cool. I like where that's going. But that's not what you watch Thundercats for. And I think that was, for me, when I watched that show, I only watched maybe 5 or 6 episodes, and I lost interest. Because, one, the nostalgia factor, gone. Two, the storyline, it wasn't really original, and that's another thing. Part of what I'm getting at is that all that stuff in the 80s, that was when it first started. Nobody had done Transformers. There had never been all those different series, they had never been one like that. Nowadays, there's so much that's been done, and because of the saturation of cartoons in the 80s, and a lot of those cartoons they tried to bring them back in the 90s. I think there was a Masters Universe in the 90s, and it just gets blanketed in too much, and nobody wants to watch that. And even if it gets a small fan following, it's not a huge fan following. Even when they did the original Masters of the Universe movie, it was 5 years later than it should have been. If they had done that year 2, maybe 3 after it had started, you probably would have had a bigger box office. But you have to remember, kids like me, I was about 8 or 9 when Masters of the Universe came out. So by the time that movie came out, which I think was 6 years ago, I was 12 or 13. I was into martial arts movies. I could care less about a Masters of the Universe movie. And I think it's all about timing. And I think that's what kind of got lost with that. So Masters of the Universe, some of these things, I guess the prime example, and I know some people out there may disagree with me, is that with the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, okay? It comes out in mid-80s. They make it nice and bubbly and cartoony. And that because at the time, that was what all the cartoons were like. Then, it kind of stuck around. There was a live-action show, which was horrible. But it's always between the movies. It's always been in circulation. There's always been toys on the shelf. Then in the early 2000s, they did another cartoon. And because at the time, everything was a little more dark and gritty, they made it darker and grittier. And it lasted for about, I think, 4 or 5 seasons. I mean, they even changed it halfway through and made it like a sci-fi thing, and then they came back. And what the point is that it evolved and changed with the times. And then now with this new Nickelodeon one, it's kind of gone back to being a kid show. because that's the target audience. And as much as we want to say yes, we want that Teenage Ninja Turtles cartoon that's like the comic and a movie that's like the comic. Very few people read the comic. Teenage Ninja Turtles is looked at as a kid's show. It should be a kid's show, so the movies are going to be for kids. With Masters of the Universe, they did that update, but I can't say it wasn't that good because I didn't watch the whole thing. But the episodes I watched, they were kind of and there was just a little what they tried to do of making it really cool and appeal to older audiences just isolated the kids. And I think there were some toys. I don't know how well the toy line did, but I think that's the whole point of all of this is that with such an oversaturation of a kid's version of cartoons in the 80s, and then when we go back and watch them as adults and we go, wow, these aren't any good, we don't want to watch when they redo them. And then they redo them for people who have grown up. So now kids don't want to watch them because they can't follow it. And what happens is then there's no fan base at all. G.I. Joe and Transformers, they've done a great job of every 10 years there's a new cartoon. Every 10 years there's a new figure series. And, then they did the movies. And then, as Transformers movies, say what you will. I loved them. I don't want plot. Just big robots fighting each other. The G.I. Joe thing, on the first film, I see what they were trying to do, but it was crap. The second film, a little bit better. So, Sergio, to answer your question, oversaturation, intended for children. They try and make it for older people, and they don't care because they've lost the interest with the nostalgia. I think that's why you see a lot of these 80s cartoons that they try and revive or make movies. Nobody wants to see it. Nobody cares anymore. I don't really care about whether they do a Masters of the Universe movie. It'd be cool, and if they did it really interesting, I might go see it. But they tried, and it was blah. And the last cartoon I didn't like. So more than likely, if they do a movie, I'm probably not going to go see it. And that may be the opinion of a lot of people. So I think that's what you're running into, is they try and make the cartoons too adult, so there's no children appeal. And then you get absolutely no fan base. And without a fan base, you're not going to get toys to sell. You're not going to get anybody to put money to make a movie. So I think that's what happened with a lot of those revivals and why a lot of them failed. So, sorry. All right, question number 2. I think I may have went way too long on that one. Question number 2 comes from Sup FoolHD. And he asked, will they do an Infinity Guantlet movie? What he's talking about is in the Marvel Comics, Thanos, who is a big villain in the Marvel Comics, a cosmic level villain. That you don't know what that means. It just means he's big old god and runs around space trying to destroy things. He put together the Infinity Gauntlet. Gold Gauntlet, all these different Infinity Gems, he had to collect them. They've hinted at it in the movies, and this is not a spoiler. It might be a spoiler to the after credit scene, but it's not a spoiler for the movie. At the end of Thor 2, Volstagg and Sif meet with the Collector, and they basically give him one of the Infinity Gems. They tell him to keep them because they already have one back in Asgard, and they mention that the Tesseract is one of the other Infinity Gems. So, will they do an Infinity Gauntlet movie? I don't know if they'll do the specific story that happened in the comic, because in the comic, Thanos collected all of the jewels for the Infinity Gauntlet, and then he tried to destroy the universe, and all the celestial, godlike beings of the Marvel Universe, Eon, and Adam Warlock, and Galactus, and all these other crazy big characters came and fought him, and there was this whole storyline based around that. I don't think that they're going to do that level, because they haven't introduced that level of characters in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I mean, honestly, there's only 7 heroes in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. You got Iron Man, Captain America, Thor, Hawkeye, Black Widow, and Hulk. I'm sorry, 6. Yeah, 6. There's really only 6 heroes. And now they're going to have Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch, so now you've got 8. Ant-Man, 9. So, yeah, okay, you might get up to 10 by the time Avengers 3 is happening, because Avengers 2 is already going to be Age of Ultron. So that's definitely not going to deal with the Infinity Gauntlet. So I think what you're going to see is through Phase 3 and going into Age of Ultron and going after that with Guardians of the Galaxy, is that you're going to start seeing more of this Infinity Gauntlet, Infinity Gems being collected, and that he might have it in the third Avengers movie when he becomes the final villain, or he becomes the villain of the Avengers. But I don't know if it's going to follow the same storyline. So, to answer your question, they will not. I don't think they're going to do exactly the story from the comic, but the Infinity Gauntlet definitely is going to have a part in Thanos' power when he becomes the ultimate villain, which I suspect will be for Avengers 3. We'll have to see Guardians of the Galaxy, what they do there. Captain America 2, I don't know if they'll, from what I've seen, I don't know if he'll really have anything cosmic level to do. So we'll just have to find out, watching those movies, how far they'll go. But I'm suspecting that the Infinity Gauntlet will be part of those movies, but it's not going to be called Avengers Infinity Gauntlet. It'd be kind of cool if Thanos' quest, which is him getting the rest of the gems, that might be interesting. And maybe Phase 4 deals with Thanos being the ultimate villain, and you have more of the Cosmic Guardian Galaxy come in, Adam Warlock being introduced. That would be really interesting, but I don't know how far ahead they've planned everything. As much as I hate to say it, but with all the actors getting older and not sure if they're going to recast anybody, you may see Avengers 3 be the finale and then they reboot everything afterwards. I hope not. I think all comic book characters should be treated like James Bond, and you just recast them and keep going with it. You really look at, there's been 5 or 6 guys played James Bond. They kind of did a reboot with Casino Royale, but at the same time, it did kind of just more of an origin because they never told the origin. So for me, I would love for them to keep doing that. Like now that they've got Ben Affleck as Batman, just keep making Batman and keep casting new guys and Henry Cavill. I mean, just keep the storyline, because for me, what happens with a lot of these comic book stories that we want to see on the screen is that, like with the Infinity Gauntlet, without all the back history of all those characters leading up to that storyline, you can't just do the Infinity Gauntlet with there's only been 8 movies in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, whereas there was 30 years of comic book stories before that crossover. So for me, I just hope they keep going. And, with the fact that DVDs and downloads and Blu-rays and Netflix, we can keep all those older films in our head. It's not like before where, I can remember as a kid, it could take 4 or 5 years for a VHS to come out of a movie, and you wouldn't be able to watch it until that VHS was available. Now, within 3 months, the movie's on the shelf for you to buy. So hopefully they can keep building. But yes, final answer, Ultimate Infinity Gauntlet, hopefully Avengers 3, not called Infinity Gauntlet, not the same story, but definitely part of Thanos' weaponry whenever he becomes the main villain. So that is the 2 questions from the junk box. I've gone way longer than I want to. So I was going to talk about Marvel vs. DC films, but that's probably going to take another 10 minutes, and I don't know if I really want to go that far. So I'm going to go ahead and say next episode I'm going to discuss Marvel vs. DC films and see if anybody else comments on any of the stuff. Maybe have a couple of more questions, and we'll go from there. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you liked it. Again, email me. Comment below. Subscribe. Let me know what you think. Guys, have a great one, and I will see you guys next time.